So if you have ADHD, one thing you're going to notice when you're first getting into reading is, number one, it's going to be difficult in itself. It's going to be difficult to actually pick up your first book and start reading. But alongside that, it's also going to be very difficult to actually remember what you are reading. This is the way our brains are wired. We tend to gain knowledge and then just immediately throw it away, especially if more knowledge is coming at us. So I remember when I first started reading, way back 3 years ago, and I got into my first book, I remember I had difficulties remembering what I would read. I remember I would open up my book, I would read the first couple pages of it, and then just gone. It would just be completely gone out of my brain. I'd be like, wait a minute, what did I just learn? So I'd have to go back and I'd have to reread it again and again and again. And obviously this creates unnecessary amounts of time when you want to finish a book and you actually want to read it. But it also is very frustrating too, because like you're trying to learn, you're trying to absorb what's in this book. I know it was frustrating for me. You're getting mad, you're getting pissed off because you want to finish the book and you want to obtain the knowledge and you want to learn and grow, but your brain is just not letting you. Your brain is just not allowing you to absorb the knowledge that is in it. And like I said, this can be greatly exacerbated if you're ADHD like me, and your brain just basically takes in information and just throws it away. Takes it in and just throws it away. Doesn't actually remember and digest it. So there are 3 methods that are going to help you when you open up a book, and it's going to help you be able to remember what you read. Because be honest, what the hell is the point of reading a book if you can't even remember it? If I just wanted to just read a book and just scroll through the pages, I would do that. I'd read some random stupid book that I didn't really care and I wasn't really interested in. But you actually read books because you want to remember the knowledge and use the knowledge as you go out in your daily life and retain the knowledge in your brain. And if you're not doing that, what is the point in reading a book? There's no point reading a book unless you can remember what you have learned. So I'm going to tell you 3 methods that I have used to be able to sit down and read for hours on end and remember every single chapter and every single page that I read. And I've been able to retain that information in my brain and use that to go throughout my daily life. So one of the ways to actually start to remember what you read and actually begin to retain the information that you read in a book is, number 1, start focusing on each individual chapter as opposed to the entire book. Because here's the problem. When you have ADHD, you look at a book and it's a big thick book, like it's about this thick right here. And the problem is you get overwhelmed. Your brain gets overwhelmed, your brain gets scared, and your brain has troubles organizing everything else. So that can really cause your brain to, I want to say, panic in a way. And instead of retaining all the information, because like I said, your brain sees that as so much information that it gets overwhelmed. Instead of just overloading your brain with information, just focus on each chapter. So let's say you buy a book and it comes to your house and you see it, and it's like this thick. And you look at it and you start to get scary. Don't think of the entire book. Think of just open up the book, look at the first chapter or the prologue or the epilogue, whatever it might be, or the intro, whatever it might be. Look at it and be like, okay, that's what I have to remember for now. And you can even set it as a goal and be like, okay, well, today, this is what I'm going to remember. Chapter 1, whatever. I'm going to look at this chapter. I'm going to just completely put my hype, because that's the thing with ADHD. We are very, very hyper-focused. We can just focus on one thing with just, how do I explain? Just absolute uninterrupted focus. We can do that. But we also have to be careful not to allow our brains to drift. So you get one chapter in the book. Look at the one chapter and just put your entire focus on that chapter. Let's say it's a fitness book and chapter 1, how to diet properly. And look at that entire chapter and be like, okay, I'm going to put all my focus into this chapter of dieting properly. This is the one chapter I am going to read today, or the one chapter I'm going to read for this morning or this afternoon or before I go to bed, whenever. But just focus on that one chapter where you're like, okay, this is a chapter that I'm going to learn, that I'm going to put all of my hyper focus into. Then once I have retained all that information, then I'm actually going to start to remember and retain it before I move on to the next chapter. And another way that you can also do this too is if it's a book that has actionable steps, like for example, the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was the first book I ever read by Dale Carnegie. I wouldn't just read the book and then just like slap it closed and put it back. I would read the first chapter about how to get people to like you, for example, or let the other person feel like they're in charge or they're right. I would read that one chapter and then I would go out and I would apply it. I would apply what I've learned, because think about it like this. Think about it as a professor. Let's say, for example, you're in school and let's say you're taking like a math class. In one day, does the professor like bombard you with every single piece of the curriculum that's you're going to be going through in the class? No, your teacher or your professor doesn't do that. They span it out over months, which is like a semester. They span it out over a semester and they're like, hey, today we're going to learn this and then we're going to quiz you on that and give you some homework so you actually remember and retain. So the best way to retain information and remember what you're learning is to focus on one chapter. And if you have a book that gives you actionable steps, when you focus on that one chapter, go out and apply it before you move on to the next. And on top of that, I also want to say, when you do finish a chapter, I think something that really concretes it into my brain the best, and especially if you have ADHD and like this can really, really help you, the best way to concrete it in your brain is to also recap what you've learned. So for example, I will read one chapter of a book. And when I'm done reading it, I won't read the entire chapter again, because the point is we're not supposed to be doing that. But I would go back to like the chapter's front page and be like, the fitness book again, chapter 1, how to diet. And then I would just skim over, because most books have like bullet points or like highlighted points of the most important stuff. So I would go over to like, say, for example, the fitness book, How to Diet. I'd look at the diet part. I'd be like, okay, well, I would look over and be like, okay, so you got to track your calories up to this bullet point here, recap. Oh, and then remember to eat this food. I'll go over here. Remember to hit your macros here. And I would just quickly recap the important points that I would learn. And that would honestly cement it in my brain, which would allow me to remember it as I went on. So number 2, and this one's going to be very, very important. You need a quiet place to read. The problem is I guarantee this is what's happening. You're sitting in a very noisy environment, whether it's your house with your family screaming or your roommate screaming or your girlfriend's doing something in the kitchen, or you're probably outside and you're like a park where there's like kids screaming, wherever, or you might be at work where they're doing a bunch of work, wherever. You need a quiet place to read, because here's the thing, especially if you have ADHD, your brain is very, very easily distracted. Because think about it. You've been in a very loud environment and you've been sitting there and you've been reading and you hear like a loud clank. You turn your head because you're worried about that. And then, believe it or not, that actually cuts your distraction. Because let's say you're deep into a book, you're reading and you're doing good, you're retaining all the information, you're following the one chapter at a time, everything. And then all of a sudden your girlfriend just starts to talk to you and you're like, and you look up to her and you're like talking back, and then you look back and you're like, well, what the hell was I just on? I can't remember what it's on. Then it takes your brain a bit to not only retain that information, but get back to the track of reading. So you need a quiet place to read. I remember I would try to read at like my workplace. I work in a very noisy workplace, and there would be tools going off. There would be people talking. There would be loud noises. Like I could not focus. And the best way that I solved, and this was my case, and you can probably do this too, is if you have a workplace that has like a quiet office or a quiet conference room, or like I asked to go into my manager's office, that can be really good. So what I would do is I would go in, I would close the door, and it would be quiet. And I would be able just to use my ADHD laser focus into this without being easily distracted. Because as people with ADHD, you know that you get very easily distracted. You're doing whatever the task might be, and like you hear noise outside, and then boom, okay, you're distracted. And then you look over and you look back, and then you're like, well, now I can't remember what I was reading. You need a quiet place to read. So you might not have a place in your home. Like I get it. You might live with a big family. Your sister or your brother might be screaming. Your mom might be talking on the phone. Your dad might be watching TV or whatever it might be. You may not have a quiet place to read, but if I would recommend is to find a quiet place. And the one place I would recommend is libraries. Libraries are an amazing place. There's actually, in my local library near where I live, there's actually a quiet, they called it the quiet space. There's actually a quiet space where if you close the door, it's just silent. It's complete. It's like I don't know if they've insulated the walls, but It's completely silent and you can just sit there and you can read. It's really, really quiet. So I think a library, if you're really, really, really serious about reading a book, getting into reading, and actually learning what's in the book, a library is going to be your best friend. For God's sakes, that's where we used to all go read books in the first place, was a library before we all decided to sit at home. But library is one of the best places if you can't find a quiet space in your home. So find your local library. Like, a lot of them don't, at least where I live, a lot of them don't even require, like, you don't even have to get a membership card. You can just walk in and start reading. But at least that's where I live, and I know a lot of them are the same way, but it depends on where you live. But yes, you need to find a quiet place to read. And number 3, and this is the last one that I've actually only recently decided to start implementing and figuring out, is don't eat before you're going to read. Or at the very least, wait at least 1 or 2 hours after eating before you start reading. Because hear me out, and this is going to sound weird, but trust me, it works. When you eat food, it is the biggest task you can demand of your body. Digesting food is the biggest task you can ever demand your body. So think about it like this. When you eat a big meal, especially if it's loaded with carbohydrates, you eat a big meal loaded with carbohydrates, you notice that you feel lethargic, you notice you feel sleepy, you do notice, like, don't lie to yourself, you do notice your brain is not working at full capacity. So for example, and I've done this before, let's say you eat a big meal and it's like dinner time, for example, and then you want to go in your room and you read and you're opening the book and you're just like, you notice, and don't lie, you notice that your brain is just like drifting off and your mind's just not working. You're looking at a page and you just read it over and then you can't remember it and you have to go back and read it. You're demanding too much of your body and your mind. Because reading in itself, especially if you're not trained to read, like especially if you're very new to reading, especially if you have ADHD, reading in itself is already difficult. So by adding that layer of difficulty of digesting food and demanding your brain and your body do that on top of reading, you're not going to be able to read as effectively as you could. So, and you know what? Honestly, do this actionable step right now. I want you to read one chapter of whatever book you're reading with well fasted. Well, you haven't eaten anything, or at the very least, waited 2 hours after you ate. Read that one chapter, and then remember it. Then the next day, or whenever it's at your most convenience, eat a big meal. Eat a big meal, especially with a lot of carbohydrates. Try to read that same chapter. I guarantee you will not as be effective at remembering and reading as you were if you were fasted. So yes, do not read on a full stomach. You're not going to be as effective. I remember actually back in when I used to first start reading, I thought that was all like nonsense. I was like, oh no, that's nonsense. That doesn't work, right? That's a whole lot of hoo-ha stuff. But I remember it was weird because when I was at work, I would read on my lunch breaks. I would go to lunch, I would eat my big meal for whatever my lunch was, I would try reading. Was not near as a matter of fact, I was dozing off. So imagine, I'm reading this book and I'm just like, whoa, and it's like, oh, right? Like, I'm not as effective at reading as I would if I was fasted, if I didn't eat anything and I didn't demand my brain and my body to have this demand. So try your best. I know it might not be possible, and it's fully understandable if it isn't. You can still read and retain information, but you're just not going to be as effective. If you can, fast before you read. Don't eat at least minimum to 1 to 2 hours before reading. So that's it. Those are the 3 best strategies that I have used, that I have implemented as somebody with ADHD to not only read more effectively, but to remember what I'm reading. So try those 3 tactics for yourself, see how effective you get at reading, and I hope it works out for you.